So we'll go ahead and get started. So we took a look this time at Lean UX, the designing great products with Agile teams. So ultimately, this is the second edition of the book. It came out originally in, I think, 2013, and then this iteration in 2016. But ultimately, the book breaks it down kind of in three different ways. So basically, the principles, the process, and the organization, team organization of how it is that we put Lean UX practices and user experience practices in with Agile teams. And so this is actually, I think, a little bit different than the books that we usually read, where this seemed to be a little bit more kind of pointed and having a real process behind it. And so kind of almost a step-by-step, where a lot of the other books we've read so far have been kind of more holistic principles and theories and kind of things along those lines. So was glad to see this as it's almost like a step-by-step of how you can put this into plates and really merge design thinking with Agile teams. So to start out, would love to just kind of open it up for people's thoughts on the book in general and kind of what it is that might have been kind of a main topic that really stood out as you were reading.
Well, since Jay didn't read the entire book, do you mind if I start off?
Please, go for it, Darren.
All right. I think probably one of the main themes that I got from this that I really enjoyed was the fact that having the collaboration between the different functional groups and having a shared understanding at the end, that was something that I didn't really think of before, and I think it's a huge thing. They keep on harping upon it, like every single chapter you hear.
Oh yeah.
As I was highlighting, I saw shared, shared understanding over and over again.
Exactly.
So that was a really big takeaway for me, and so that was something that was a little bit of a surprise for me. I was like, oh wow, I never thought of that before. Another thing that was a surprise to me was I never really thought about how things were done in the past too much. So the book talked a little bit about that, and there was another book that I was reading too that talked about it, and I never really thought about the fact that when they used to ship software, right, when we didn't really have the internet per se, it was like once that thing shipped out, that was it, right? There was no fixing it, there were no changes or anything like that until maybe 6 months down the line, next version. So a lot of the mentality that companies have, some of the habits, they're still going on today because they had that same mentality from prior. So the siloed work and the rock star designer, those type of things they reference in the book, without the knowledge of how things were done in the past, you kind of don't really think about why they even came about in the first place. So that was a big thing for me. And I was like, you know what, that's just weird that I've lived through all that, but I never really thought about it, So I thought those were pretty cool points.
Oh yeah, those are definitely areas I highlight too. The big one being the shared understanding. I mean, that just, you're hit across the head with that. It's throughout, I think, every chapter. But definitely that aspect I really appreciate you talking about, of where it is that the way we got here today. And I think that's, why history is so important, because I didn't think about that either, about how things, you had to have it right the first time, because when you print, 1,000 brochures or 1 million brochures or put up a billboard, make a bunch of clothes, those have to be right the first time out of the gate, because you can't iterate on those, you can't change that. And so it's taken this many years to kind of switch that way of thinking.
Yeah, it was funny how they talked about, remember you used to get a I don't know what they were called, there was a little card that you would get and you could register your product. So remember those days. They're like, those days are long gone. And they kind of mentioned, so that was one way you could communicate with the company, perhaps, if the company was lucky, right, to get feedback.
Yeah. And
now it's like you can't even use a product or a service without having an account. You have to have an account. You have to have communication all the time. And it's interesting too, because that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing for customers, but in a way it's kind of a bad thing. It makes it a lot more work for companies, obviously. And I mean, we're all customers, and for the most part, we're all working at companies where there's either a service or a product that's tied to the internet, right? Even if you have a product, usually there's a service that's tied with it as well on the internet. So you're reaping the benefits of like being I don't like saying you are a consumer to a certain degree, but somebody who's using the product. And then when you go into work, you have a lot more work because you're now, having to meet all those demands, and you're competing at a hyper level with other companies.
Oh, sure. Well, you bring up a good point. I think something that the book didn't quite touch on is that aspect. If you remember, it was talking about how really customer research should be integrated almost weekly, to where you're designing the early part of the week, and then you do customer research towards the end of the week, and you keep doing that cycle each week. That's something to think about, though, is the customer experience with that, about just like how often is it that the same people are getting reached out to, or how does that influence the experience that the customer is having with the product or whatnot? Because you're right, it is that aspect of you have to sign up for an account every time now when you start up things, constantly getting messages for feedback or taking the survey or different things along those lines, where, to your point, back in the day, the only time you would really hear is if you stepped out and registered that product using a card, typing in the code manually, all that, or calling in, for a complaint or something like that, calling the hotline. And so that's something that I think that I hadn't thought about until you're saying that might be missing from this, is on the customer side of things, what does this process look like, or how should you be concerned with kind of the customer, or asking too much of the customer? What's that right balance, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, like if everybody was doing lean UX, right, and they're all doing it at the same pace, then what's the next thing that's going to be the differentiator? So we'll have to wait and see, because eventually everybody will be doing the same thing, right, to a certain degree.
Sure, exactly. Yeah. And then also too, I think, like, how does it work into our lexicon, or what we expect as customers too? Because now, we're kind of at that point where we expect the survey after each and everything, or the,
Yep.
Rate us on this or that. And it could just be something that we kind of adapt to, and just kind of, that becomes the new norm or whatnot. Well, I was curious, Darren, you said something also too about the shared understanding. So that being something that really kind of standing out. And you said that it kind of surprised you or whatnot. Would love to hear you kind of go into a little bit more of that, about what you found really novel about the shared understanding, or what it is that kind of, what you learned from it that was surprising.
Yeah, well, so you're about to get into this. So as you're not going to be the design rock star, right? When you start off, you're going to be the person who's going to try to be getting people excited about user-centered design, right? So you're going to be getting all those different groups together and getting them involved early, even groups that normally wouldn't get involved with things for design. So, I mean, that's what I really liked about the shared understanding, is actually pulling in different people and giving them, like, inspiring them to know that their voice matters. It's a big deal from the very beginning, not later on, right? Later on, it's a big deal too, but that's usually too late. So getting them in there early and showing them how much fun design can be and how valuable their ideas are. And the fact that again, the book talks about it, that one person that they used to go to, it's kind of like, how dare you think that one person would have, the best idea out of all the people that are at the company. It's just not, it's not possible. You know what I mean? If you brainstorm with a bunch of people, the odds are the group is probably going to think of something together that's just as effective, if not better, or something that the other person didn't think of at all. So I think that's a fantastic part of the book as well. So that collaborative design is huge, and it makes people not only get excited about the design, but you can actually sense, you're not going to have everybody from every department coming in, so you can have representatives, but that person's going to go back and kind of do your job for you in a way. They're going to be all excited about what they did, and they're going to be able to communicate within their functional group and say, hey, I'm loving this, and here's why. And they'll be able to talk the language that needs to be talked to their group. So it's a beautiful thing. You don't have to go and try to convince these other groups that this is a good thing. That person's doing it for you, and they're doing it with the most effective language and with their relationships that they've already built with those peers that they work with. So it's fantastic.
Well, I think that collaboration piece has been a common topic through a lot of the books that we've read. So recently, it just seems like collaboration is everywhere. So diversity in thinking and people and backgrounds, and getting those people together and different things along those lines. And so I'm curious as to how that's, being taken, and if that's actually, the case, as far as like steps being taken to have that kind of collaboration together, because we keep hearing about it time and again. And some things in the book, the Lean UX, I'm curious, we hear time and again. And so I'm wondering if it's just kind of a rehashing of some of those things that we've heard of, or if it's kind of the original, the OG that kind of put together some of these thoughts and all that. So it's like that shared understanding, and then also the moving from outputs to outcomes, things like that. And so at first, that's what I was thinking, was just this aspect of like, I've heard this time and again. This seems to be just kind of a rehashing of kind of topics that I've heard in different forms in different books. But to think back about, just when this came out was in 2013, so about 7 years ago. And also the case that, when it is that you talk about great books and user experience. And this is a book that had been recommended on the book club time and time again. It could be that that's the reason that this has been recommended, because it's the one that really maybe brought this to light, or had put it in a package that was really easily attainable. So this aspect of really being able to balance it with the structure that's already in place, those agile teams, and be able to kind of put on another layer as opposed to reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, sometimes it's a timing thing, right? If you have good time and a little bit of luck, and like you said, the way that it was written, it's very easy to understand what they're talking about. Whereas somebody who is, I don't know how many design books you've read, but I mean, I can give you a good example even from school, like for graphic design, it gets kind of, it's out there a little bit sometimes. You're like, this guy is very, very much into wordiness and like thoughts and theory, but you don't really get to the practical matter of it.
Right.
So I'm in the camp where there really isn't too many new things, honestly. Like, it seems like somebody can write a book 10 years after somebody wrote the book already, and everybody will say, hey, it's a new book. This is a great new book. So history does repeat itself. However, they, like you said, they put probably 3 different things together in this book, right? So it probably just struck a chord at the right time, but it's very useful because you can. It was interesting too, like I went online, I looked at some of the reviews on Amazon, and I remember in the book, I don't know if you remember, Russ, but when there was I think as he was about to get into one of the chapters, there was a disclaimer kind of, he's like, well, I'm not going to talk to you about all the different ways that you can implement the process that we're about to go through. It's probably like a paragraph long. And then you go on to Amazon, some of the best rated reviews are, I wish this went into more detail of how to, implement all this stuff.
Sure.
It's like the book would have been huge if they went through different ways, right, of doing that.
Sure.
So it's kind of funny, like how quickly, when we talk about forgetting 10 years ago, never mind 10 years ago, you just read the book and you forgot that the guy said, I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, that was actually kind of a criticism that I had of the book as well. It's kind of, I love books that give the step-by-step and real kind of get nitty-gritty into like the practical examples of how you can do this. And so I think that this is a great medium between kind of some of the books that we've read previously in the book club, and then maybe what those folks from the Amazon, like you were talking about, that might have been expecting, like the huge thick book, really get into the minutia. Because that's what I really appreciated about Lean UX, was the fact that it gave the principles and the theory, but also really went into depth as far as the process. So, a majority of the book is that whole process section of, figuring out what is the best method for your MVP, your minimum viable product. So to be able to test, and then also coming up with your assumptions and hypotheses and things like that. So, I mean, if you remember, that's like the biggest chunk of the book, is really those step-by-step, being able to have this process of going from the assumptions to creating something and testing it, and then going back to the table with assumptions. So, so that was actually a large part of the value that I got out of the book, was that just kind of practical piece. And so, we were talking about, the different areas that we're in, and how user experience can be put as a thought process, can be put to all different types of jobs and functions and things like that. So that's been something I've been thinking about, in my own experience with this aspect of trying to come up with experiences for people, changing client or customer to, teammate, and change that language, and still able to use those diagrams that they had, or, the question boxes as far as the form to fill out, to really just get at the base need of the customer, or of the people that you're working for, designing for, things like that. So that's something I appreciated too, is that if you do a little bit more thinking as well, these principles really, I think, do even lend themselves outside of the tech realm, or product design realm in and of itself, and really go to service design, or kind of more broadly experience design and things like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the important things too, they talk about it a little bit, like when they give examples of saying, this is our example that we're going to give to you, and it most likely isn't the best example. You are to come up with your own way of implementing this process. So you can use this as a model for right now, but just like everything else in life, companies are different, your clients are different, the customers are different. So there's no way, there's way too many variables. If you're just taking something and you're regurgitating it and doing it exactly that way, I think that's fine when you're starting off. But the goal should be that you're learning something as you're going through that, and you're evolving, you're changing it, because like, your company is an Apple, right? You don't have the same organization that they do. I love it when people make websites that want to look like Apple, right? Nice sanitized look. Nobody's being fooled by how your website looks, and you don't have Steve Jobs, you don't have Tim Cook, you don't have any of those people. So don't try to be that. Be your own. Learn something while you're trying to go through. You can start off looking at Apple, as some inspiration, but it shouldn't be your goal to be them, right? So the same thing with the books. They're there for some principles, like you said, fundamental principles, and it's like cooking. You can cook something 1,000 different ways, and they can all be really good. Some of them might be better, depending on what your tastes are. So I'm looking forward to trying to apply some of those principles. How are you actually going to, have you thought about, like when you start off in your new role, like what are you going to try to do to get people kind of kickstarted to get on board with Lean UX?
Sure, and that was actually a question I was going to ask you as well. So go ahead and start thinking, because that's something I'm going to point to you too, because you were talking about.
I have no idea.
Well, you're saying I'm looking forward to putting these in practice. So think about how you could do that. So I think that the first big reason thing I'll do is on page 29. This is what I was talking about earlier too. This I don't know, you might not be able to see it.
No, I see the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Huh, that's weird, huh?
Yeah. Oh, here, I'll turn it off. So basically this assumptions page. So kind of that step-by-step of, so that's something.
Yeah. Yep.
Assumptions. So, going through and just answering the questions, either myself or, with people to really get those personas down and really getting to the heart of the assumptions of what is the need of the people that I'm going to be working for and creating designs and experiences for. So really kind of going through that and doing the work of thinking through it, but then also kind of interviewing folks and talking with it and kind of clarifying that. Especially too, with the book, it talked about proto personas. And so I think that's something that will really be beneficial kind of in that realm too of, it seemed like proto personas are that aspect of, instead of doing a bunch of research at the beginning, go ahead and use your best judgment, try to get a persona and then go test that, as opposed to spending all the time doing the research at the beginning to put something together. And I think that especially, since I'll be with the same organization, that is something that will be beneficial because I do have knowledge of the folks already, or at least assumptions I have.
Yep,
and then we'll be able to test those assumptions and whatnot. So not having to recreate the wheel or start from ground zero, and we'll be able to kind of be able to get up to speed a little bit quicker in doing that proto persona versus what you usually hear of the kind of persona from ground level or from stage one or whatnot. So I think that ultimately that's one of the things that is going to be the first step that I do is really utilize the process in here to figure out what the assumptions are and then hypothesize ways to test those assumptions, which is kind of what it is that people need from the get-go.
Yeah, that'd be great. And your proto personas, they'll change, like they said, right?
Yeah.
So that'll be nice. And if you can make those available to people that are around you and get, it'll be kind of intriguing for them, I think, if they look at it and they see as it changes, and just having that ability for people to be able to speak the same, what are we trying to do? Who are we trying to serve type of thing is important. What did they do? Like a hot dog or something like that, or dog?
They said, the banana slicer.
Yeah, and there was another one too with the dog. Yeah. Like, what's your vision? It might have been another book, but if I said dog in the room, somebody would say, have a vision of a hot dog. Somebody would have a vision of a regular dog. You know what I mean? So it's important to have some sort of a model of your customer that you all can like exactly know this is what we're talking about, not something else, and we can change it if we need to. Yeah, there we go. Yep. So what was up with the dog? All right, so it was a drawing on the left and a real one in the middle.
Exactly. And I think it's just that aspect of schemas and heuristics about, whenever you hear a word, what I might think of is something completely different from what you say. And it goes back to that shared understanding, right? Of just getting, the more people are the longer that people are in the same room, having the same conversations, exposed to the same research, it gets to that baseline a lot better than kind of all these different assumptions that people might have. And so that was a big thing too, I think, with the shared understanding, is that it cuts down on divergent thinking, or not, that's not the right word, because you want to,
I know what you meant. Yeah.
But it cuts down on that quite a bit.
I have a question for you, Ross.
Yeah.
What
please.
do you think? Do you remember Us Two as the example? It was a design.
I do, yeah.
So they said that us two, and part of their process was to get with a client and work with them. I think they said like for 2 weeks or something like that, or a week. It was a short period of time, but it was a getting to know each other period. And I was very curious if you picked up on, like, how would that even be possible? Like, how could you possibly work with somebody who's not even necessarily your client? You can't charge full rate to do some. So they did some design studios basically with them, right?
Right.
Did you have any ideas? Did you like think to yourself, what's going on here? Like, how can they even do this?
Sure. Well, it reminded me a whole lot of the design sprint, with Jake Knapp, basically the 4 days of getting people in the room and just started thinking and designing a little bit of it. I actually thought that was a great idea. I was thinking back and forth on, like, is that something that you should charge for independently, or should that be part of the process of trying to, like, win that account? I think, though, that as I'm talking, one of the things that might be a downside of that being trying to win the account, then it is that aspect of you're still trying to, like, win people over, as opposed to that if there's a charge, that there kind of might be more that aspect of we're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing us, to see if, like, we can really work together. Whereas if there wasn't a charge to it, it's kind of like you're putting all the eggs in the basket and you're trying anything to be able to work with that and to get that project. But I think that that's something that I've actually seen a lot of different places is kind of becoming something that's been more the norm and kind of becoming, I don't know if it's best practice, but a practice of just getting people on the same page. So I'm actually kind of behind that, because I think that so much of this book, but then also kind of relationships moving forward, is that aspect of them being long-term relationships, and also really thinking about the outcomes as opposed to the features. And so to really be able to focus on the outcomes, you have to be able to be on the same page as far as, like, what is it you're really solving for, what's the problem, all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's hard to just kind of in a brief know whether or not you think that you can reach that, or that you can work together in that. So I think it's something that's becoming more necessary, the way that the relationships are kind of are evolving into that really co-interactive or co-active model of really working together and in conjunction. And so it kind of seems like it's necessary to really set the stage with that, and to make sure that everything's on the same page, and that with that deeper relationship, I think that you need to have a better idea of what people can provide and where they are coming to the table. And so that's kind of my take on it. I saw that. I think it was a benefit. What about you?
Yeah, I thought it was a benefit. I was just curious of how it was structured monetarily. Like, how do you actually, because it's way better than, writing up an RFP, competing with other people to the lowest common denominator, right? That's how those usually work. Exactly. And then this whole thing's about not having documentation. So why start off on the wrong foot? So I was just curious if you knew anything about, like, how it would act. Because even if you went out on your own, if you decided to do just some consulting work on your own as a freelancer, like, that would be pretty valuable, pretty powerful thing to be able to say to somebody, hey, I'll sit down with your, maybe it's a small team, and I'll sit down with your team and we'll do a design studio or sprint or charrette, whatever you want to call it. And we'll get together and we'll figure out some ideas. And if you like working with me, then after we can continue. But I was just wondering, like, how are they actually, because what if they don't want, as a company, if you came to me, Ross, and you said, hey, how would you like me to work with you for a week? I'd be like, yeah, it sounds really good. And you're like, by the way, I charge my full rate, but we can, after we're done, and obviously you'd be going, Darren, I don't know, I'm going to also evaluate you at the same time. And at the end of the week, we can both decide whether we want to continue or not. So that would, would put risk on my company that I have to spend some money with you for a week long, get together basically and try to brainstorm things. And then at the end, potentially say, no, I don't want to work with this guy. So I was just curious if you had ever heard, like, how the actual fundamentals for the financial structure was set up on that. I'm dying to know. I'm going to write to the company. I'm going to write to the company and ask.
Let me know what you find, because that's the thing. I have heard of it, and I have heard of it becoming more of a practice, and I have heard of a fee being associated with it. And so the reason behind that, I'm not quite sure, 100% sure. And don't know the company's point of view, but it could be that fee is worth the risk of what it is that you get out of it. And it's got to be effective, because that's something in the book they were saying, what is it, over 50% of those sessions
numbers
turn into full-time relationships.
Yep.
So it's got to be effective. And so I don't know the business perspective as far as if that's something that's beneficial to them or just beneficial to the studio, or if it's beneficial for both or whatnot. But it seems
maybe they are doing it for
working.
free. Maybe you're right. Because it trumps everything else, because you're not going to get those jobs if you don't do it. So
sure.
I don't know.
Well, no, but I have heard more often that there is a charge for that session as opposed to it being kind of included. So I don't know. I would love to hear whatever you find out. Please share that. That along.
I'll write to him and just ask.
All right, sounds good.
Can't hurt, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is that the cool thing about the book in theory was that there's two. The website that you can go to for the different links and for some further learnings. I actually went to it though, and it doesn't. It'd be cool to kind of go there and kind of get some more insight on some of these things, but it could just be that the link was down or whatnot. But you asked me the question about what it is that I wanted to put into practice. What about you, Darren? What is that you would hope to utilize in the next few weeks, months, years?
So I would hope to just be able to it all depends, because it depends on where you're going to be working, right? So I don't have any idea where I would be. Hopefully it would be at a smaller company where I would have with stakeholders who are kind of on board a little bit. I've actually gone to interviews at some companies.
Sure.
And coming in, you just get a sense that they're hiring a UX designer, but they have no idea what UX design is. Mm-hmm. And even in the course of the interview, they would just say things that are really just way out there, like so wrong. Mm-hmm. And it became kind of frightening, to be honest with you. It's like, I would love to have a job, but coming in here, you would have to have such a personality, like an overbearing personality, somebody who's like really about to just start yelling and screaming to people how inconsiderate they are with the the guiding principles of UX. So it's going to be difficult, but hopefully I can find like a company that has like a growth mindset. We say that all the time with user defenders, that they understand that they need UX, and that they need somebody to come in and kind of be able to hold their hand a little bit. So if I did have that opportunity, the first thing I would want to do is make sure I have all my relationships in order and that I have everybody on the same page. And I would probably do the same thing as you. I'd really be looking forward to having a bunch of people come in together and start off with the studio, basically, with the getting everybody together and figure out what we need to do, what the problems are, what all the assumptions are. I was going to tell you something else too. I was trying to think of another company that I actually talked to. It escapes me right now. It'll probably come back to me, Ross. But anyways, I do the same thing. Just start from the groundwork. My hope is that the people that I get hired by admire some other company that has UX design, and they're open-minded, and there's not too many politics. But that's depending on the company you go into. There's potential, right, to have all kinds of politics going on. Mm-hmm. And my hope is that it's just not, there will always be politics, but my hope is that it's not to the point where it's dysfunctional and that you can't even get off the ground. Another thing is that I hope that they respect the design groups as well, because we saw in the book, some companies just don't. And if you're invited to come in as a UX designer and you're not there at the beginning, even sitting at the table, so to speak, that's really bad. And if you can't get other people to come in, if you are invited to the table and you can't get other people to come in, then that's not lean UX, right? Mm-hmm. So it'll be very interesting to see. I think people around here in my area, even though UX is growing, from my experience speaking to different people, it's got a long ways to go. Not a lot of people even know what it is. Some people that do know what it is say that they do it. That was my example. I had somebody who reached out to me through LinkedIn, and he was starting a company, and I think what they were trying to do was get photos that people took to be annotated, like automatically, or as you're taking them, be annotated. And he was saying, these moms want this, blah, 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 to be able to sort pictures. Everybody has problems with photos. We take thousands and thousands of photos, right? So he came in, I think it was probably like 6 months after they had already started like most of their work. And he's going over feature after feature after feature. He desperately wanted UX design, but he had somebody who was one of the founders who he, got in an argument with, and she ended up taking off, and there were lawsuits and stuff like that. He said she was doing the UX. So my thought is, like, UX is pretty involved. Like, there's a lot of time. I'm not going to say it's the hardest thing in the world to do, but it's very hard to do another job and do UX the right way. So I think people don't really respect it the way that it should be respected. You know what I mean? So those are the samples that I'm getting, and it's very rare when I talk to somebody who actually says the right things or who respects it in the proper way. So I think hopefully it'll keep on growing, and this certainly doesn't help. I don't think the COVID-19 helps us at all, to be honest with you. But yeah, so hopefully I get in the right company. I know it was a long answer, but those are some of the things I see here on this side of the country.
Oh, sure. Well, I appreciate you saying that, because that was something I was thinking about while reading, was this aspect of, how important these principles are to, I guess, look out for in a job as well. So if you are going around and interviewing or looking around, to keep in mind, saying, is this the type of company I would like to work at? And so things to be aware of, so to be able to ask the right questions and things like that within the interview process and set yourself up for success. I'm glad to hear that was a direction that you took with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got to be careful, right? You don't want to get a new job and then
right.
wish you were out of there within 2 weeks.
Exactly.
Wouldn't look good.
Yeah. Well, you were talking earlier about the aspect of, every company's different, and, wanting to be the next Apple, or, to kind of take too much from one of those companies or whatnot. And that's why it's difficult to maybe have a lot of these examples, because every company's different with different assumptions and customers and things like that. What about the examples in the book? Were there any that you really resonated with or that you appreciated more than the others?
What do you mean? Can you clarify a little bit?
Yeah, so at the end, the case study, or talking about Taproot, we talked about Us Too, but just kind of any of the examples that they gave in the book that really kind of resonated with you, that you were interested in, or?
You know what? I'm going to be a little negative here. So there was one, they were talking about Meetup.
Okay.
And they were showing, like, oh, look at Meetup. They've started this process of Meetup's been around for a while, right? I don't know, do you use Meetup at all?
I actually just moved a couple months ago to a new city, so I have it's kind of slowed down a little bit with this social distancing and whatnot. But yeah, so I did use it in kind of starting out here.
So yeah, I can't remember the other case studies too much, but I did think, like, Meetup wasn't a good example, in my opinion. Maybe back in 2013, I thought whenever I go on there, I do not enjoy the user experience whatsoever. I don't find it very pleasing. But yeah, I'd have to thumb back through Ross. I can't really recall anybody in general. Did you have one that you really, like, something that resonated with you with one of the case studies?
Yeah, so I think that with Taproot, something that was interesting to me was the Wizard of Oz mock-up or whatnot. Yep. That's something I hadn't really thought about, that aspect of it being something that looks very much like the finished product, except the back end pieces aren't connected. So basically, to be able to have that functionality, it's somebody kind of behind the curtain being able to kind of pull the information or kind of do things. And so that was something that I thought was really interesting, just that whole concept of the Wizard of Oz type of MVP.
Yeah, just doing things cheap, right? Cheapest and most effective thing you can do. Is that what they say over and over again? Because there's no way you'd want to hire a back end build out for something like that before you even know you can validate it, right? That was a cool one, pretty cool. I wonder how long they've been doing that. That's probably been going on for decades, but in different means. But it was really neat. I'm trying to think if there are any other ones that came to your mind.
Let's see. So there was the Us Too. There was the PayPal one, Taproot. I think that at the end there were a couple more as well. PayPal. Yes, I think that those were kind of the Hello Group. Oh yeah, and so that was another agency one that we were talking about, just kind of like the way that they work together and whatnot. But yeah, I think that that's really the one that stuck out to me, was that aspect of Taproot and the Wizard of Oz as far as MVPs.
Pretty clever, huh?
Yeah, and that's the thing I wonder too. How many times I've run across this and been part of that without having recognized it, or also too, like the 404 page, or where the button to nowhere. how many times,
Yep.
that's been something I've been a
Yeah.
part of. So that's been
Well, you
something
thought
I've
it
been
was an
thinking
error,
about.
and you're like, oh, that's too bad.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Or
think
like,
Amazon actually used to do the Wizard of Oz sometimes. I think when they
oh,
had,
really?
the products that you purchase this product, you might want to check these other ones out before they started putting in the algorithms
Oh,
to actually try to figure out what was good for you. There was another
yeah.
conversation. This is an aside, but
Yeah.
it's related. So the Wizard of Oz is awesome because it's people like actually making choices right for you, so they get it. If you ever think, there was another conversation, I think there was something on a podcast, and it was another book that I read. They talked about like algorithms, and they talk about how they're cool at first, and then they kind of get weird later on, right? Because they're not people, they're computers. So they have, now you can see like photos that are generated by an algorithm that will actually make a person.
Yes.
Have you seen those? But when you look at it, there's something wrong with it, even though it looks right. So it's a little bit off. And they talk about like YouTube as well. Like YouTube uses tons of algorithms. They'll say, oh, we noticed you watched this video, you might like this one. But those algorithms are written to ratchet it up a little bit, like take whatever the sensational was that you were looking at before and bring it up to the next level, because their goal was to keep you on there as long as possible, right? To see as many ads as possible. So for Amazon doing that, the Wizard of Oz thing in the background, and I think even Apple, I don't know if you like Apple at all, but they have their news app, basically, if you look at it. So a lot of times when you go online to read news or whatever from different services, again, those stories are fed to you via an algorithm based on data that you've provided from your previous reading. So even I think Microsoft just ended up firing a lot of people that were responsible for one of their news apps. And there's a lot of clamor about it. They're like, oh, so you're going to go all algorithm, huh? But I know Apple, everybody uses algorithms still, but they have a lot of people who actually work on the curation of the actual stories that are going to be fed. And the reason is because the algorithms can't really do it as effective, right? So that was my aside. Just like be wary if you're ever working with somebody who thinks that, oh, well, everything can be done, all these choices can be made by a computer. They really can't. It'll be a little bit off. There'll be something weird about it, and your customers will pick up on that as well. So that was something that I'm going to be thinking about going forward. I was trying to think of some of the old tricks that they use in here as well.
Well, you're thinking of those.
They talked about doing paper prototypes, right?
Right, yeah.
Like getting extremely cheap. So I kind of like some of those because they were talking about how easy it is to build one and how people don't have to have any technology background.
Yeah.
But the problem is eventually as you go to, do another version, it gets increasingly difficult. Like time becomes more of a factor as you try to go along with it. So all those little examples that they have are really cool. It's just a matter of like being able to understand when to use them. And I think some of them as well, they talked about all of them, didn't they, pretty much for the prototypes? They talked about actually coding one as well, which was going to be a huge expense. It was going to take forever, but it was going to give you it was great for higher ups, people who don't understand sketches or, low level prototypes. So that was pretty interesting too. I'm trying to think of any other companies that they had for examples in here that I might be able to peg off. I have the digital version.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not as easy for me to find things unless I bookmark them, which I didn't.
Right.
What are some of your other thoughts about the book?
Well, so to talk to a point that you had and you were talking about was the aspect of the algorithms. I know that on iTunes, they had to update the algorithm because it was almost too random. So it would put songs by the same artist, or it was so random that people thought that it wasn't random. And so it had to kind of code some of that in. And so that actually kind of goes back to, I think, one of the topics we talked about in our last book club, Ruined by Design, and this aspect of, or maybe it was mismatched or something along those lines, but the aspect of why diversity and collaboration is so important in user experience, because even though we would like to have pure algorithms, any algorithm is still created by a person and curated by a person and things along those lines. And so our own biases kind of seep into those algorithms as well. And so I think that's something that's an interesting point in addition to what you were saying. And what was the question that you had before I got off on that tangent and stayed on it?
Nothing else. So like, what else did you find that was interesting in the book? Like for little examples that you were like, wow, that's kind of bizarre. And I never would have thought of that. And it's very cheap, easy way to go.
Sure. Oh, as far as like prototypes and things like that?
Yeah, anything, because they're very stingy in this book.
Yeah, they went to a lot of them.
That's what I got
Yeah,
for my notes.
yeah. Really, it's kind of the paper one that you had mentioned really stuck out to me because I've seen times where people will, have like slides as well, and so they have like a piece of paper behind another piece of paper and like almost slide it. So it's funny how and interesting to see how people were able to kind of make functionality even out of something as static as paper and things along those lines. So that kind of stuck out to me, but also too, I think just the piece that's through all of them is just it was the curve. It was the higher fidelity is the more truth that you're able to get, but also it's like the more certain you are of your assumptions and hypothesis, that's the higher up on the curve where you go. So if you really are pretty certain about your assumptions, that's when you really put the effort into the high fidelity.
I like that one
Whereas
too.
if you're just trying to figure stuff out, go low, because I mean, it can go all kinds of different ways and iterations and things along those lines. So that's really something that stuck out to me when it came to most valuable product and being able to kind of bring that out to the table.
Let's see what else I have. Do you have any good questions that you wrote down to kind of jog my memory and get me talking more?
Yeah. Well, and so before we go into that, I'll just say hey to Katrin. I saw that you had logged on, so we're here. Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
Pretty good. It's raining. It's in the evening in Germany right now, and I'm happy to be here.
Good.
I read the book just recently because it's from the public library, and I got my hands on it. And I was intrigued by the prototype stuff too, because he talks about balsamic and how he was able to achieve showing stakeholders how it works and that they could tap and swipe and everything. So that was very intriguing because I don't know the tool. I only have been working in Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma. So balsamic is pretty basic in like design terms, but I like how Jeff is putting that out, or they both put that out there, how it is like tangible for stakeholders, that you can grab something and understand the product easier that way. And I don't have a lean agile stuff background yet. So that's all new to me, and I love how they brought both UX and lean together.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing, and also thank you for being here. Welcome to the book club. And
very welcome.
Yeah, and we're recording this so that other folks that aren't able to join will be able to watch this later. So appreciate your thoughts and insights. So one of the questions we had earlier was a point that I think that you brought up, this aspect of, you were saying you don't do Lean UX yet. What are some of the aspects of the book or some of the processes or ideas that you would like to be able to utilize? What really kind of stuck out to you as something that you think would be a best practice for you moving forward?
I'm always a little bit careful with the term best practice, because the thing is that I read an article just recently how best practice is a very wobbly term, because it could mean anything to anyone. Like in every case scenario, it's something different. I like how, well, that's joke in itself, but how lean the process is. You know, you cut off all the extra meat out from the process. You cut out maybe something that is really time consuming. I liked how he describes, or they describe in the beginning, that they all got in a room together, and after several hours they had their like first prototype or something. I think this is ideal scenario that cannot be achieved in every kind of work environment, especially if you work for a client at an agency where there is no budget, and maybe for something like that, we would call it like you're playing around, and you always have to use the defenders. Here's the defend I'm dropping. Defend your modus operandi to the others. Like you say, why are you doing this? Why are you locked inside this room? And how is that getting you anywhere? And so I think it always depends. I have worked in corporate environments where time is not an issue. And I could easily see that work. But the problem again is the lean aspect, because I have seen Scrum and Kanban methods integrated into processes in corporate environments, but most of the time this was business or financial stuff or something like that. It was not a creative thing. Or I have worked for a manufacturer of wooden prefabricated houses. They did a lean process at the assembly band, or what's it called, where they assemble the big chunks of wood into parts for the house. So there was like, you have to do 5 pieces an hour, blah, blah, blah. They were trying to slim down that process. That being said, I know, long-winded intro, I think it will always be a fight and a defending of that process. I think you all discussed when I came in that you have to sometimes adapt things too, like you will do it your way. And right now, after all the podcasts and things I listen to about product ownership and Scrum and I get the idea that no matter where you go, it will be different. So this is the problem with the best practice.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. And we were talking about that earlier as well, just kind of this aspect of these are great principles and whatnot, but each company is different. Each assumption that customers have for each product or with each company is completely different and whatnot. And so be able to adapt into that as well.
The thing is that something really stuck out to me is like get rid of the UX roles or of the roles in general, that you don't have like all the role play, so to speak. It's at the end of the book, like in the 8th chapter, that you get rid of the like image that a role has to serve to others. And that's something I would love to see, because you have to imagine that in Germany, everything is like very well organized and very it's very German. It's very stiff. It's kind of every company you will go that is not a big global company will have huge problems with the agile methods, because it's not the way things work. We have like maybe it comes from the war. We have a tendency to accept top to bottom decisions and then just let it trickle down on you, and there will be no, like, you can forget about the design, and not the design sprint, but the daily stand-up or stand-up at all, and that a stand-up will function the way it could be, like Scrum or Lean or something like that has intended it to be, that everyone is speaking, because at the end of the day, maybe the IT guy gets like talked over all the time because he is seen as a nerd and he's only in his dark room coding, and people have prejudices. And someone like me who has worked in marketing and can speak and articulate herself will get more time, because people like take a more liking to somebody like that, and that's unfair. And I think that should be obsolete, because everyone has an opinion, be it good or bad, or I don't have to agree. But in the end, we would achieve more if all the roles could get in one room and be a little bit less stiff. You know, it's very hard for me to explain, because we are like an ocean apart, and the mentality and the structures are also different. But maybe this is something you can take away from this book club, that when I'm reading Lean UX, it means something entirely different to me, because cultural stuff.
Exactly. And I appreciate that that perspective. That's something I hadn't thought about when reading the book, was the cultural perspective of this. And so a lot of what you're saying sounds like that aspect of the no rock stars. And I think in the different cultures and in different regions and just different industries, that's easier said than done sometimes, it seems.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's going to be some companies that, you know, the executives aren't going to want to relinquish their power, basically. And if the company is able to still run, like, companies aren't going to go under tomorrow because they're not doing Lean UX. It's going to take a while, right? So these companies that don't adapt to the new ways, if they continue to do it the way that they do it, if there is a competitor that comes along and is able to, you know, function correctly and do things and then actually adopt these, some process doesn't have to be lean UX, but something that does, like you were saying, Catherine, to get people involved who have a voice and their opinion matters, it's going to make a difference. And that company is going to eventually pay in the long run. They're not going to be able to adapt overnight after too. Like once they're so far behind, they're going to, you know, it's too late. So I've actually, going back again to Ross, I did have another interview with a company who they were in publishing, and they had this really, really old technology, and they catered to some really, really older people who were kind of not using the product. It was weird. And they would, like those people were used to the product the way that it was. Kind of like Photoshop. Photoshop's a good example, right? It's been around forever. Everybody knows that it has issues. It's very difficult to use. There's like 3 or 5 different ways to do everything in there, but their user base, they're used to it. The people that have been around for a long time, and there's no way that Adobe can actually change this thing overnight. They're stuck with it. So this company was kind of the same way, but they were totally catering to these people, and they would use edge cases from these people, like very, very professional people who worked with their product all the time. I'm thinking to myself, you're not even taking into account any of the other people. None of the other information is coming through to you guys. You want UX. UX is user experience. User experience is actually getting out and talking to people, right? Like we're supposed to be doing, and they're not doing it. So I kind of see the same thing that you're talking about, Catherine. These higher up people, they want to hold on to their power. There was nobody else that was a competitor for this company. But as soon as somebody does come along and they get involved in that space and they start doing things right, that company's going to be in big trouble, and they're going to have their lunch eaten, you know, and that's just the way it is. But these other guys get along, you know, they can keep on going without any ramifications because they have the power, and as of right now, everything's fine.
Absolutely. And I have to add to my playing around scenario that there's almost no budget or no sense for user research. This is what you are describing. So talk to your user, find out who your user is, and then speak up for them. But the problem is, if you're not allowed to talk to the users, I absolutely feel you, Darren. It's like I have been in a company too where people think they are the user. That's the huge problem. We read that in every book or in every article, but still, if you articulate it out loud, we feel the sense of how important that is. It's a misconception of people that really like it really destroys products sometimes. It destroys maybe budget too, but you cannot tell the people who like invest the money, maybe the client or like the higher up people, how things really should have worked in order not to go down with all this kind of stuff that you have been working on. Because I have a huge problem in my career. If I don't see sense and purpose and like good things in the things I do, I have no interest in doing them. And then I get frustrated, and then I get sick because psychosomatic stuff. And then I have to most of the time leave this job. And this is not a fun game. But the truth and the harsh reality is that I would have to find a workaround how to deal with this kind of sternness from people who think they are the user and they know it better, or they make decisions that I have not proposed, but I'm the one standing in front of the customer, making a happy face and doing the PowerPoint presentation and saying, oh, look here what happened, and oh, I'm sorry. It's not always the client, perfectly said, Darren. It's sometimes it's maybe even your teammate or someone who is throwing you under the bus. it's hard, and that's why maybe Jason called this user defenders, because it's really a superpower you have to like defend as well, and your health and everything, and your saneness, your sanity, that you stay sane.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you both for sharing. I think that goes to the point. We're at time, so I want to be able to be respectful of your time and to wrap it up. But I think that, Catherine, you make a great point in that aspect of how important community is. And so for time like this, for folks to be able to come together and to speak with one another. So I wanted to thank you all for being here and to join the conversation. But then also, too, to make sure you keep tuning in to User Defenders and to keep that community running strong and whatnot.
Of course.
Thank you both for being here. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you for hosting, and looking forward to the next one that we have.
Yeah, so be on the lookout. We'll be posting the search for recommendations, and then also the vote for the next book club here soon.
Yeah, thank you for doing this in the hard times you are facing over there. Maybe you can change that with the election in fall. I hope so. Maybe a knock on wood over here, because there's nothing left to do for us else. I hope I did not like hijack this thing here, because coming in late and making a big entrance, I'm sorry. But I was stoked to get on this, because I really also like the small group. I have been in a book club with around 20 or 30 people, and it was like crickets chirping instead of people interrupting each other. So this was fun and very intimate. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here in perspective.
Yeah, and really see me next time. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
See y'all. Take care. Thanks so much.
See you, Jason.
Bye, y'all.
Stay healthy and safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.